Hello! In this video I want to help you avoid one of the biggest mistakes with balanced scorecard design. Because if you understand this and how the balanced scorecard has evolved and developed, and actually how people simply misrepresent it, then you will avoid some of the biggest pitfalls and mistakes in the whole approach of using a balanced scorecard. Now, I'm sure you have seen on the internet all over the place practically every single diagram that talks about the balanced scorecard. It uses this model, or rather this picture. And this picture is derived from page 9 of the very first book. And it's very simple. It goes vision and strategy in the middle, 4 boxes: financial, customer, process, learning and growth. Therefore, people say the balanced scorecard is about creating a balance of measures across 4 perspectives: financial, customer, process, learning and growth. Now, the problem is that's not what this model is about. It's not what this picture is about. And Norton and Kaplan were using an early version of this back in 1992, but by 1994 they ditched it. And I remember arriving in their organisation in '96, looking through the server, and they never used this model again. Unfortunately, it's all over the internet and it's highly misleading. Now, let's look at why it's highly misleading. The first thing that this causes people to do is think that the balanced scorecard is merely classifying measures. You know what? Most organisations have a collection of financial measures and lots of process measures, and therefore the balanced scorecard is about creating more customer and whatever learning and growth means, so that there is a balance. Now, that is not what the balanced scorecard is about. As I'll show you in a minute, the balance amongst measures comes from something completely different. Now, the second problem that this creates is that people start to think that this is merely a measure classification system. So, not only do they look for measures that look to create some sort of balance in each perspective, but they start to add perhaps a different perspective. For quality, or people is a very popular one, or environment, or anything else. And I've seen models with up to 12 categories of measures, and again, that's a mistake. That is not what this model is about, as I'll show you in a second. The other problem that this causes is because people go straight to measures, and measures are quite hard to cascade through organisations. Some are easy. Financial measures are dead easy to cascade. Tell me what your revenue is, tell me what your costs are, tell me what your cash flow is. Activity and process measures are dead easy to cascade through organisations. But customer ones and learning and growth ones aren't necessarily. So you end up with the same problem. You're sitting at the top of the organisation trying to think through measures that will easily cascade, and as a result you end up with 70% financial and probably 30% process and no measures in the other ones. And the reason I chose those is there was a bit of research by McKinsey back in 5 years ago that said most balanced scorecards are actually financial and process still. They're not even balanced. Okay. The other problem with this diagram is that these arrows, as they're shown, don't actually mean anything. They're merely there to make the whole picture look pretty. There is no question that drives that. There are questions on the diagram in the book that says, how does process contribute towards vision, how does learning and growth contribute, how does customer contribute to vision and strategy, and how does financial, but there's nothing that links these. It's one of those annoying diagrams where if you ask the question, what do the arrows mean, they're only there to make the diagram look pretty. So, there were 2 big insights that went on. The first one, very early, is that actually we don't want measures here, we want objectives. Now, what people who are using this diagram don't look at is that in the original diagram, on page 9 of the first book, there's a little picture. And this little picture shows a grid. And this grid has got objectives in every single one of these before it gets to measures and targets and projects and responsibilities and the other piece. Every single one of these has objectives in it. In other words, you develop objectives before you do measures. This is not obvious in the way it's presented. If you go straight to measures, you're missing objectives out, and that's a fundamental mistake. The other part of this is there's really a cause and effect relationship here, but it's not circular. It goes, if we become a better organisation, it'll improve our processes, so our customers will be happier, so they'll give us money. It's a cause and effect relationship. So by 1994, we've thrown this out, and this is completely misleading. I strongly recommend, if you ever see somebody using this diagram, say, why are you still using that? And if they think of it as measure classification, they'll be in a hole. So let's look at what, actually it's on page 30 of the first book, but what replaced this diagram? What we now have are 4 perspectives in a cause and effect model. And within each of these perspectives, there are objectives. And what Norton and Kaplan were doing was saying, you know what, there's a cause and effect relationship running between these objectives. So let me just build, let's put profit, perhaps revenue, and perhaps cost to keep it simple. And let's assume there's 3 things that you have to satisfy for your customers, so they give you revenue. And that begs the question, what do you have to do really, really well to satisfy your customers so they give you money? And the question is, how do you do that economically? And the final question is, so what do we have to learn and grow and develop as an organisation? Which gets you to the learning and growth perspective. So what we've now got, and notice I have not mentioned measures, is a cause and effect relationship across a very simple model of perspectives. From the perspective of the finances, how are we doing? From the perspective of the customers, how are we doing? From the perspective of the processes, how are we doing? And from the perspective of how do we learn and grow and develop as an organisation, how are we doing? And if we improve our capability, that should improve the way we do things, and so our customers will be happier and they'll give us more money. And as long as we can do that economically, we'll make margin, revenue, profit a more valuable company. Now, this whole diagram is called a strategy map, and it only contains objectives. The balance scorecard behind the strategy map contains measures, targets, responsibilities, initiatives, objectives, the details of the objectives. So what you have is a cause and effect model, and then behind that cause and effect model, as you can see on this diagram, which just simply shows a single theme of a strategy map and the scorecard behind it, we've got details behind each of these these objectives. So for instance, you might choose to measure this in 2 or 3 different ways. There might be a couple of projects that support that. There might be projects that support this one. And likewise, there might be different measures of this and different measures of that one as well. Now, these are called perspectives. And the cause and effect model is the vital piece that runs across the perspectives and between the objectives in each perspective. Now, this strategy map is clearly referenced really, really early on. It's actually on page 30 and continues to be referenced all the way through their second book. And by the time they get to the third book, they're actually shouting, you know what, it's all about the strategy maps, which is what this is. I'm just going to quickly introduce you to a couple of other pieces of this. You always put purpose and mission on the top, because that provides a frame, because overall that's what you're trying to achieve. And I always place underneath, let me write it down here, the organisation's values, which underpin where learning and growth is going to come from, so that you deliver the processes better, do things better, so the customers are happy, so they'll give you money and doing it economically. So these values and the purpose and mission frame the strategy map. Now, you may have noticed I was asking a question as I went up and down the strategy map. I'm going to make it really explicit now. You always draw these from the top. You can start with the customer and check that you can get the revenue from them, or you could start with the revenue and work through. But you always ask the same basic question, slightly different ways, as you go through here. And this is about focus and choice. So, to get this revenue, what are the few things that we have to do for our customers so they will be happy, so they will give us the revenue? Given that this is what the customers want, what are the few things that we have to really do well to make sure that we satisfy our customers so they will give us money? What are the few things that we have to do really, really well in learning and growing and building our skills, knowledge, capabilities, technologies, culture, whatever, so that we do things better, so that we satisfy our customers, so it gives us revenue? So what are the few things that make the biggest difference? And this is another thing about strategy maps. Strategy maps are about focus and choice. And strategy is about focus and choice. What are the few things we have to focus on? What do we choose to pay most attention to, or choose to do and choose not to do, as Michael Porter? And which bit will give us the biggest leverage? So, the strategy map contains really three things. Objectives, before measures. The measures are in the scorecard. A cause and effect model that describes how the changes you're making within the organisation will ripple through to implement the strategy. And within that, there is a specific model about focus and choice. What are the few things that will make the biggest difference? There is one other thing about strategy maps that we've talked about already, and that is that when we're developing them, we develop strategy maps for a team. So, if you can imagine, for the executive, we may have a strategy map, and they may have a balanced scorecard sitting behind it. So that's the strategy map, that's the balanced scorecard. They may have a number of units, each with their own strategy map, or departments, or business units, departments, or teams. And what's happening is that this, with the scorecard behind it, is the focus and choice for this particular team. Strategy map scorecard, strategy map scorecard, strategy map scorecard. And of course you can continue this cascade down through the organisation to whatever is the next level. Now, what this is doing is creating for you a cause and effect relationship that is rippling through the organisation. So we should see a story about revenue, customer, process, learning and growth. That theme would in part be represented there as well, and you'd expect it to be represented in each one of these in some way, depending on how relevant it is to it. But notice we are cascading objectives before measures. And you can carry on this 2 or 3 levels further than this. I normally do 3 at least. Before you start to populate the measures on here, which you can then think about how best to aggregate the measures back up so that as an overall view you get your objectives and how well we are doing with them. The same is also true of the projects that might be going on or the initiatives. So you can look at the projects and initiatives at this level and start to aggregate them back up to see which ones make the biggest contribution to the strategy. The other thing that this does is all about exception reporting and scope of control, because this strategy map and this scorecard represents what that team have to focus on, and these below represent what the teams below them are going to focus on and pay most attention to. Now there will be inevitably some sort of reporting going on between these teams, and you may get a certain amount of reporting by exception. But you can see here that this is actually making a big difference to the way a particular team are thinking about their strategy. I have the overall piece I've been given, I have my piece that's in my control, and these are the pieces I'm partitioning out to other people. So what we're doing now with strategy maps and the cascade of the objectives in the strategy map is cascading the story of the strategy through the organisation, and then you can start to pull the measures up. This is significantly different to what you might do if you believe that it's about cascading measures. This has much more to do with management by objectives, but it's a highly structured, more structured approach to management by objectives, because what you're doing is saying, you know what, this capability that we need to build, let's say it's about marketing skills, manifests itself in this team here, and in this team and this team, and partly over there. So you can see how there's a golden thread of this is where these people have to make a contribution that makes a difference, that feeds all the way up through the organisation. So, in summary, there is this whole piece in here about do not start with the 1992 model. The 1992 model was thrown out by Norton and Kaplan in 1994. It causes classifications of measures, and it gives you all sorts of problems. You'll end up with 200 measures in different categories. What you should do is objectives before measures, and also develop the causal relationship between financial, customer, process and learning and growth. Learning and growth, process, customer, financial, the cause and effect relationship. And the cause and effect relationships between objectives in each perspective, and as you ask the questions that help you move between them, which I'll go into more detail in a while, you're actually asking focus and choice. What are the few things that will make the biggest difference? Because strategy is about focus and choice. You can frame it with the purpose and frame it with the values, and then you cascade the strategy map through the organisation, building up the scorecard once you've got sufficient detail in choosing at which level to have the measures, the initiatives, the responsibilities, etc. And the important thing is that a balanced scorecard and a strategy map for a team defines what they want to do. And so you end up with a much, much clearer understanding of the story of the strategy and how that fits together. Something you would never achieve if you use this simplistic representation that so many people pick out and use.